There's no such thing as a thriving, long-term raw food community. Is that true? No, it's absolutely wrong. In fact, it's the complete opposite. And you get people that are critics of a raw food or raw vegan diet, and they say there's never been any populations living on a raw food diet. There's never been a population living long term on just raw food. That doesn't happen. That can't happen. It's the exact opposite. Almost every single population of life, of animals, of grass, of plants, of trees, of everything, every form of life, every population for billions of years, live on raw food exclusively, with no cooked food, with no other additions to their diet. That is the truth. There is one species that eats a cooked food diet. There is one species alone that eats a cooked food diet, and the human race is not winning prizes for great health. Every type of life, I just want to repeat that, because I hear guys like Dr. John McDougall and a lot of the people that follow him, they're like, all the major populations live on starches and live on cooked food, all populations. That's of human beings. But what about life? All of life, apart from one species, all of life. And by the way, if there was other species that ate cooked food, they've died out. So the species that ate cooked food, only one of them still exists. The others died out. Whereas there's billions of life forms, of bacteria, of animals, of grass, of plants, trees, mushrooms, everything that eats exclusively on a raw food diet. Exclusively. Can you argue with that? Can you argue with the model of nature? A lot of people, they get too focused down on like the human race, human beings, we're anthropoid apes, and we're the only one that doesn't eat our natural diet, mostly raw, entirely raw food, but mostly fruit, vegetables. But we're anthropoid primates. We're part of the primates that have been around for 90 million years. Primates on Earth, 90 million odd years. How many of them, how long do you think, of all the billions or millions of how many of them were eating cooked food ever? It's a very small percentage of time that cooked food's been part of the diet. It's been part of survival rather than survival. You know? And to use that argument about the lack of successful populations is so misguided and so small-minded and small-thinking. So yes, a lot of human populations base their diet on starch. None of them were vegan. You know, that kind of annoys me as well. Vegan doctors, vegan diet, like none of those populations were vegan. Why? Was it because grains couldn't give you everything? You know, like grains. You know, there's a phrase: "Man cannot live on bread alone." It's true. You can't just live on grains. You cannot live on grains. And if these populations realised that people were dying when they were trying to live on starch-based diet, then that's when people start to move towards, well, we've got to eat something else to try and add some extra nutrition to the diet. So that's the problem with moving away from fruit. That's the problem with going towards starch. Because actually when you go towards starch, animal products end up being part of the diet because it's just a part of what's happened. Now, there's a lot of thing about starch-based diets, and like starch is just so amazing and it's great. Now, have a look at populations that have went through huge deficiencies, real big deficiency problems. Not just populations, but little societies and little things that have went through problems. Living on starches, almost always. Well, always. So when they talk about every population lives on starch, like, yeah, and every huge deficiency problem was, so all these people are like, yeah, we're on a starch-based diet, it's all good, and fruit and vegetables, like, But that wasn't always the case. You know, this is why people ended up having to incorporate all sorts of weird stuff into the diet. They started doing weird things and adding stuff, obviously animal products, whatever. And that's where this goes back to, this idea that we need meat, we need all this other stuff. It comes from a time where people were trying to live on grains. You just can't do it, you know. You just can't live on grains. Look at beriberi, which was something that affected a huge part of Japan. I don't know the full story about it, but basically they were trying to live on polished rice. They were given polished rice. Created huge problem. Vitamin B deficiencies. There's a thing called pellagra. The United States of America, parts of the United States, people were living on corn. They weren't eating it the right way or processing it in the right way, whatever it is. Pellagra. They got a huge deficiency problem from that. Starches. Scurvy. The sailors and everything living on ships, what were they eating? Probably bread. Maybe they were eating fish as well, who knows? But they weren't eating fruit, basically. Huge deficiency problem, scurvy. And once they got back, you know, the cure was to eat fruit, because we're frugivores and we need fruit to eat. We need vitamin C. We can't create our own vitamin C, unlike other animals. Grains doesn't have vitamin C. Now granted, potatoes will provide you with your vitamin C. You can live on potatoes pretty much exclusively for a long time. Potatoes, relatively new crop, really. So if you're going to try and live on starches, you want to live on potatoes, if you're lucky enough to have been in part of the world where potatoes were available. You know, but sometimes you hear like Doug Lyle and people like that, and like, oh yeah, we would have been out in the jungle, you know, eating potatoes. And you're like, what? Where are you getting potatoes from? For a start, most of these things are toxic in nature, absolutely toxic. You know, tubers and roots and leaves and stuff, so many of these things are completely toxic. The idea that human beings were just wandering around like, yeah, they'll pick up, dig that up, yeah, try that out. A lot of these things would have killed you. There's a film called Into the Wild, and long story short, a guy goes out into the wild, starts eating a lot of stuff, and he ends up getting poisoned and dies. And it's a great film though. And part of that was because he was eating stuff that he didn't know, he didn't realise how toxic it was. And some of it was like, I don't know if it was a type of potato or it was a type of grain or a type of seed or a type of legume. I think it was a type of legumes. People talk about legumes, like, oh, legumes are great. Like, well, yeah, but some of them like totally kill you and paralyse you. Will paralyse you. This is why I'm getting kind of serious about this. This is, you know, living in this world we have with all the foods fortified with vitamins and added vitamins and all that stuff. It's great to go, oh yeah, starch-based diet, cool, but not in history. Not in, like, people had to find a way to make that work by adding stuff to it, doing stuff, whatever, processing it in a certain way. They had to go through God knows how many experiments of people dying, people trying to eat certain types of potatoes that were totally toxic, trying to find a potato that was less toxic, whatever it was. You know, and so I'm not just talking about, oh, it digests a bit bad. It's like some of these things are toxic in nature. You know, we create. You can't just dig out potatoes, start cooking them. They will, in the case of certain things, paralyse you. They will lead to paralysis. And this guy in Into the Wild, it's came out later on that he actually became paralysed through eating these types of legumes and wasn't able to get out. So he basically lost the ability to walk. And so that's how dangerous some of this, you know, people just don't get it. Like, they don't see this stuff. So the model in nature is stick within what your environment is providing for you, and that's our problem. Because as animals, we have two things that lead to us making a dietary choice. We have our instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution. We have our environment, and we've changed our environment. We've went away from our environment, so we are not restricted anymore to the food that was available to us. And if we went back to our environment, the only thing we would bother eating is fruit, because it's the only thing that tastes good. Some vegetables as well that might be edible. So this is our natural diet. This is why it's important to get back to it. This is why it's important to kind of take this seriously. The starch-based thing, a lot of the promoters of that, I understand it's much healthier than the standard diet. It's a great thing. But But some of that history of that, the idea that, oh, we're just eating starches, it was always great. It wasn't always great. There was huge deficiency problems. There was all sorts of issues that if we'd been sticking to fruit-based diet, would not have happened. So that's my final message to do. Almost every